Maybe to appease me, you could compensate by enunciating everything you say from now on.
I think that's a good idea, and I will continue doing that going forward.
It still sounds muddy. It
Does
just sounds like you're really good at talking through mud.
I was afraid that I might sound like I'm doing a very bad George Takei.
Yeah. Is it Takei or Takai?
I don't know.
Well, that's it from us. Dylan and Andy are back.
It's been a while, but we're back with style. It's been, what? I think it's been over a year and a half. I think September 2019 was the last time we three met this way.
Yeah, what was the last thing we did?
Listener feedback. We addressed all the listener feedback, and then we just disappeared for a year and several months.
Really going out with a bang.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all that feedback. We covered all of it, and then we figured we'd come back now. I mean, there's been no real
discuss
feedback.
Something equally important as listener feedback.
Now, did you enjoy your 2020? Have you had anything interesting happen to you in the last year since we last got together like this?
No, it was a quiet year. Nothing happened to anybody. So
no, it's pretty bland.
Yeah.
I
think it's going to blend into all the other years, if I'm honest.
I don't think I'll remember it in any kind of way.
You? Oh. Well, you just said you weren't going to remember it, so follow up there probably.
No, none needed at all.
How won't you remember it? Why don't we talk through that a little bit?
Oh, 2020, how won't I remember thee? Yeah. Let me count the ways.
Christ, 2020. Let's not talk about 2020. Let's leave it. Let's let sleeping dogs lie. We've already shot it, so let's just leave it there.
Let's leave the past in the past and instead discuss a game that was released 13 years ago.
There we go. That's a great way to move forward, is to look too far back.
Forward into the past we go.
Yep.
To the wonderful year of 2007.
Yes, because as we all know, time is a loop anyway.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take a nice, joyful ride on this Mobius strip to return back to what I think everyone is still wondering, which is Puzzle Quest?
Well, I think it might be in the title of the video. There might be a bit of a giveaway.
Oh, that would be a giveaway.
Yeah.
That's going to be unfortunate for anyone who was expecting to hear us talk about Puzzle Quest, when in fact they probably just dropped off right after that shit about Takai.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah. Yeah. If we
unless
even
we
leave
cut
that.
Yeah, which now we kind of have to, don't we?
Now it's just a mystery. What were they talking about George Takai for? What was it in reference to?
Is it Takai or is it Takei?
I still don't know. I'm still not sure.
I thought you'd have looked it up by now.
No, I can't. I don't know how.
Well, we'll leave his name in the past as well with 2020, and we'll move on to the past again to talk about Puzzle Quest.
Puzzle Quest, yeah. Puzzle Quest, released March 16th, 2007.
Is that it?
That's
all we got?
I just wanted to get you on record having heard me say that.
More updates as and when they warrant.
Well, it's funny you should say that because it got an update, well, kind of an upgrade last year, but we can get to that. What does Puzzle Quest mean to you?
I mean, it's meaningless. It's a game that came out in a time in my life when I played games, and I did play it, and I quite liked it. And, you?
Yeah, I remember it very fondly. And I remember
too fondly?
Well,
fetishistically, or?
Oh yeah, like it
as a curio.
It really grates my cheese, that game. It really gets my engine running.
Oh, why that phrase of all makes me so uncomfortable? I don't know.
I was trying to think of something that wouldn't actually make you uncomfortable.
That grates my cheese absolutely does not sit well with me.
Is it because grate your cheese? Would that be a good thing?
I don't think it necessarily would be. I think like everyone, like most people quite like cheese, but then I think like when you think about cheese in a more personified way, it's not pleasant. Because it's sort of, we don't associate when, like, if someone's cheesy with that being good, whether it's their humor or their smell or, God forbid, their taste. It's not a good thing. The only thing that should really taste like cheese is cheese, and that's, again, where we want to kind of leave that. Kind of let it carve out its own space in the world, and don't disturb it.
Yeah, I guess being, like, cheesed off is generally a bad thing.
Yeah, and that's one of those phrases where it just, like, it feels so lazily in between being milquetoast and I don't know, incendiary. I'm cheesed off. It's like, what is that? Are you angry? Slightly miffed? Cheesed off.
I don't know what it means. If I told you that something really cheesed my onions, do you think that was a good thing?
No, I don't know that I've ever had a cheesed onion, unless we're including French onion soup.
Yeah,
but I don't think of it as cheesed onions.
Can you imagine just eating cheesy onions as a meal?
No, but then again, I do have money. I don't have a lot, but I mean, I
You heard it here first, folks. If you need money, Dylan has it. He has enough that he doesn't have to eat cheese onions.
If someone said, like, I've got that cheese and onion money, I go like, oh, you're broke.
That's a good point.
Because neither of those things do I typically associate with people who are flush with cash.
Are there expensive onions?
That's a good question. I don't think there is an expensive onion. You could argue that a pearl onion is expensive in name.
Sure, absolutely.
But as you can get them in cans, I don't know how many expensive things get canned. I
have so many questions right now. There's so many threads that we've created here. I don't know if there are expensive things. There must be expensive things in cans.
I guess you would can, because I guess you technically do can. I was going to say couscous. I don't know why I was going to say that of all things. What are the eggs? The caviar. You technically can caviar, right?
I thought you were going to say like those 1,000-year eggs, but that's not. Those probably don't come in cans.
Are those the ones that have like the? Oh, those are the rotten buried ones, not the ones that have like the chicken fetus in it, right?
Right. That's something else.
Okay. Is Surmstrongen, if that's the right name, is that expensive? I would imagine not, as it is rotten fish in a can.
I guess. I don't know. It's probably expensive to import because I don't think you can just buy it at your local Shaw's or something.
Yeah, probably because it wouldn't sell.
No, it's
because it is very much a Nordic dish, not a sort of a San Franciscan treat. That's rice-a-roni, as you well know.
Which doesn't come in cans, is actually very reasonably priced for what it is.
It is, and I know they've made a lot of variants, but I don't think they've ever made a Surmstrongen rice-a-roni.
It's funny talking about canned fish and boxed rice, and not about Puzzle Quest, which is what
we'll get our way. We'll make our way back. I think we're almost hitting that narrative thread where we can do a quick turn back. So yeah, canned fish and rice.
Canned fish and rice. I was at the grocery store. Oh God, no! I was at
2 years ago,
11 months ago, and
so it's recent.
It's recent, and you can see how much it's stuck in my head. I was at the grocery store 11 months ago, and they had a Goya paella kit, which included seafood in a can in the box of rice. So it looked like a rather thick box of rice-a-roni or Goya, Spanish rice, but it had a can of like mussels and oysters or something to make your own paella from a box.
I don't like it. I just don't like the idea of it.
I don't either. There's something about that feels very wrong. Like burgers out of a can or something. Like it shouldn't be.
Every time, I've seen when they do burgers out of a can, and I'm always impressed that it looks so much worse than I anticipate. Because I go and think, like, it's not going to be as bad as you think. Like, because I'm almost imagining, like, it's like most things you get in a can, it's going to be a burger in, like, some sort of liquid. But obviously that would be insane. They wouldn't do that. But then it comes out, it's like, that looks gross. That looks wet-ish and gross.
And it's ready to eat.
It's like, why is the bun in there? I can understand if you want to can, like Spam, different like bits of cooked burger and burger steaks, and then you basically provide your own bread. What situation are you in where you need the bread to be canned with the beef?
I got to imagine it's just for prop comedy. Like, because there is something that's almost
How
amusing.
much prop comedy around canned burgers could there possibly be?
There is an
Surely
amusing
once you
visual.
do it a second time, you're stealing a bit.
that visual of like taking the can opener and going around and then just sliding out a burger. Especially if there's no label on the can, so you don't know what's coming, and then you see the man on the stage slide out a burger. Like that's good for a chuckle.
I think saying that that's good for a chuckle is, if anything, highlighting how bad the rest of that comedy show was.
it's prop comedy, so it's only going to get you so far. I think burgers in cans is pretty, pretty high-minded stuff, because you don't expect a burger in the can is the thing.
No, but I also don't expect to go see a comedy show, prop comedy or otherwise, and see a man just schluck a burger out of a can as part of a bit that I paid to see.
You know what else I don't expect? Or at least I didn't expect in 2007? An RPG where the battle system was Bejeweled.
I mean, effortless and seamless, I must say.
Right? Perfect. No one's going to notice. We just went all the way. It's like a Dane Cook special where at the end it ties back to the beginning with it's so good. It goes full circle.
Yeah. Puzzle Quest, definitely not a game that came in a can.
No, it came in like a blister pack or a little clamshell case or...
That's
the
right.
internet.
That was so far back that actually would have been a physical game you bought.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think you could have had, because I think it originally came out in the PS Vita or PSP and was ported to other things as time went on. Almost nearly every platform worth porting games to since that time, including OnLive and the Macintosh.
I mean, OnLive. This is what a dizzying array of things that I don't like hearing about.
Just bringing it all back. Gonna just inundate you with as many stupid references as we can right now.
My God. All right. Well, so you specifically, let's be completely transparent.
This is my fault.
Wanted to talk about Puzzle Quest, and I think one thing that would be a great starting point this far in would be for you to tell us
Swedish rotten fish in a can.
Yeah, would be for you to tell us, or me at least, I feel like I'm owed it, why you feel compelled to talk about Puzzle Quest. Because you didn't just get it.
No, this isn't like that Jim Gaffigan bit where I just saw Heat for the first time.
Right, and insist that we have to talk about it. You haven't been stewing on it either. You didn't play it in 2007 and have been just like building up this need to talk about Puzzle Quest for the last, 13 years. And suddenly it's come to a boil. Why now? Why do you want to talk about Puzzle Quest?
I feel like Puzzle Quest made a promise to us that has yet been fulfilled by anyone. I feel like it opened the door and told us of a potential world of a type of game, a genre of game, that's a combination of RPG and fun little puzzle, and it didn't really hit the mark. I think it's the closest anyone's ever gotten. And then no one else has really tried since then, really.
Is it fair to say that no one else has tried when many people have tried? Would that constitute a lie in a court of law?
I would argue that I'm too ignorant to know the truth.
Because I also know that you've played the games that have tried, so it's like definitely a lie.
I would say that there have only been, that I've played, 2 other real attempts to make games like Puzzle Quest.
How are you defining a real versus a non-real attempt?
Well, and this is where I think it gets interesting. And maybe I'm the only one who
thinks thank God, 15 minutes in. Okay, yeah. Better than usual for us then.
Yeah, it's just now. We're now really getting to the meat and potatoes of what it is I set out here to harangue you about.
Shortly.
Yeah. We're really getting to the canned rotten fish of what I decided I was going to talk at you about.
Rolls right off the tongue. Just like that disgusting fish probably does.
I don't know how often you eat canned fish, but it does not roll off the tongue. And even like not rotten canned fish, like a can of tuna, it stays in there. It's got a lingering.
If anyone does listen to this, they're gonna bring us something like, "Are you thinking of lutefisk, not from Strong?" And I'm gonna be like, I keep getting my rotten Nordic fishes mixed up. Well, no, which one was the shark that you bury, and which one is just regular old rotten fish?
Oh no! See, lutefisk is a third one. Lutefisk is the white fish that's soaked in lye.
Oh,
and it gets like a gelatin consistency. Yeah, the buried shark one, that's a different one. I don't think lutefisk is technically rotten. It's just gelatinized white fish.
Okay.
We'll do an entire different series of videos where we review non-standard rotten foods.
I'm surprised there's more here. It's almost, if anything, we've got more to say about rotten fish foods than we do about Puzzle Quest. So let's do our best to bring it back specifically to Puzzle Quest and why you feel strongly that not many other games have actually tried to reproduce that formula.
Sure. Yes. Good point. So it's a fairly basic RPG game of moving from different towns on a map, talking to people, getting quests that are simple, go here and fight a thing, or go here and talk to a person quests, going about that, exploring a map, getting new items and crafting new items, getting new spells and mounts and capturing them. But everything that isn't clicking on the map is done through a match 3 puzzle game like Bejeweled. So fighting people, crafting items, learning new spells, capturing and training up mounts are all done through variations on a match 3 puzzle game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that differentiates Puzzle Quest from a lot of the imitators that I've played is that it's one of the only ones I've played that actually has things like item crafting, stats that you put points into, equipping items and spells, like those things that I consider far more like an RPG game.
I see. So that's really the line is not in any way regarding the puzzle. It is all about the level of RPG mechanic integration that they have around the puzzle.
Yes, because it's very much like most of the other ones I've played, they leave a lot of the RPG stuff behind, and it either just becomes the trappings of a RPG story over just these narrative match 3 or other puzzle type games that you play, or the RPG mechanics that are there are extreme. They're almost more like an idle or a clicker game. Like after each battle is fought or puzzle is solved, you can do a thing that makes it 5% easier to match blue gems. It only just relates back to the puzzle. It doesn't have any kind of flavor around it. You're not equipping a sword that does +5 damage or equipping a spell that only does these things, has these very specific effects, clears the second and fifth column, like things that I associate more with an RPG.
Right, and so you did mention that there's a couple of games that you think
I think
arguably...
the only ones that ever really came close to trying that are Puzzle Quest 2, Puzzle Quest Galactrix. Sure. They pivoted it more to like a space trader game.
Yes.
And then they had a lot more of that, but it still had a lot of the trappings of equipping items, crafting items, exploring areas in an open environment, going through a narrative that actually had quests and a storyline, and then kind of a little bit Gems of War. But Gems of War really strips away a lot of the narrative parts that make it feel like an actual story-based game.
True. I think what they do is they keep the map. They put a little more emphasis on the idea of the sort of the town building, which I think was the Citadel building in Puzzle Quest.
Yep.
Right. And then obviously because it is more if not a gacha game, it certainly is more a modern mobile game and has a lot of mechanics that are built around timers, having to wait for things to happen, or heavily emphasizing the cards and being able to sort of randomly get the cards in order to build up whatever you need. So I think if I remember correctly, did strip away a lot of the things around. I don't know if it had equipment. Did it have? I think it had equipment.
It had
per person, right? You want one thing per person.
Well, you yourself could equip one item that gave you.
That's what it was.
So they still had that, like, because you built up these cards and spells, but all those really did were give you different abilities during the match, and that was it. Like they'd each have their own little thing that they could do when you charge them up. So all the cards and characters you unlocked were the analog for the spells and abilities you had in the original Puzzle Quest.
Right.
There wasn't anything, because the map itself is just, there's no traveling, there's no unlocking new areas of the map in any real way. There's no...
I think there is unlocking. I think, to be fair to it, you don't have access to everything up front.
You don't have access to it, but they're not things that are unlocked. Like in the original Puzzle Quest, they're unlocked as part of the narrative. As you go through the story, you get access to new areas. Whereas this, in Gems of War, it's just kind of, when you have enough money, you can unlock this next city. And you can unlock them in any order that you want, other than the one that they force you just to unlock during the tutorial.
Yep. Okay. I think that's probably right. It has been a while since I played that one, but that does sound right.
The first one had those paths that you had to move along, and there were, like, enemies could pop up on those paths to kind of simulating the random encounters you'd get, like in a Final Fantasy or a Pokemon, that, I can't get over there until I beat this guy. There's a lot. It's the only one that I've played so far, and I know that there's a lot out there that we haven't played, that really felt like an RPG with a puzzle battle system and not a puzzle game with some RPG mechanics thrown at it.
Would you say that it does everything that it does do well?
I would have in 2007. In retrospect, I think there's a lot of stuff that could be improved on, that are, like, especially in the way that it does its unlocking and its pacing, I think is kind of slow.
Yeah. I mean, certainly we can always take the things, the graphics could be better, the interfaces are not as good as they could be.
It was 2007. We had no idea how to design game interfaces.
And I think certainly we've learned, I say we, like you and I have learned, I think the games industry has progressed along enough, particularly when it comes to this type of puzzle game and how popular it has become on mobile devices, where they've learned a lot about how to make the actual sounds and visuals really appealing. I would say that is not true of Puzzle Quest. I would say they are functional, but I think there are a lot of things that are I did not remember, having just recently returned to it to kind of refresh myself, things that are weirdly incongruent. An example being that when I match skulls, the sound appears to be like a Tesla coil from Red Alert powering up. Very, very bizarre. I don't associate the sound of electricity with skulls.
Nope.
But
no, that's a weird one.
They try to do that. So there's certainly some like weird inconsistencies there in the design, but I would say leaving those aside as like things that you can pretty much criticize about any game a decade or a decade and a half after it's come out. If it's not an amazingly produced game to begin with, it's a smaller effort, smaller team. What about other things that it does? Or maybe we've given an example of one that doesn't do well. What's something that you think it does do really well?
I think it does a very good job of making the puzzles feel like they have a meaning that a lot of other games I've played in this genre don't. Because a lot of them it's a very binary thing. You're at this stop in the story, and you have to either solve the puzzle to move on, or if you fail to solve the puzzle, you just have to try again to move on. Because it's treated more like a battle in an RPG, losing the battle doesn't mean you just load from the last save and play it again. And winning the battle you can win the battle with a lot of additional EXP and gold. You can win it. There's a spectrum of how well you do that affects you after you've left that battle.
So interesting. There's a couple points there, because I agree with that last point that like it does. There's a variance in what success looks like. There's a spectrum there. I do disagree though. Just if you lose the battle and you lose a lot, and it has, because it is a puzzle, it has nothing to not necessarily has anything to do with how well you played it. It could just be very unlucky. All you do is you restart. There is no other option, especially with the ones where you're sort of blocked by a battle that you have to finish in order to progress. There's no alternative there. You don't just go somewhere else. Like in a Final Fantasy RPG is an example that you sort of threw out. If I screw up a random battle, usually I can just work around it. I can run away. I can move around it, or, in physical space. Here, that's not an option. So like if I'm encountering an orc, I have to win that battle. And so it's just a matter of I just have to keep playing it until I win.
See, I would disagree there a little bit, because you can go to a different node on the map. You can go back to your citadel and craft a new weapon. You can go elsewhere and grind things up until you're...
I think that's the only thing you can do is grind. Because the assumption here is that even early in the game, in the beginning, you don't have most of these systems available to you. You can't capture things, you can't mount things, you can't craft things. You've not done any of those upgrades to the citadel. So you have to grind. And so basically the idea is you either grind through failure, and you just keep failing, because at least the game does reward you in failure. It's not a complete bust. It gives you experience, it gives you some gold. It does provide you, in fairness, the ability to ramp down or ramp up the difficulty, and therefore the rewards you get on any given battle, which I think is a good way, a better way to address that problem in that system. But it is still fundamentally a question of grinding. It's how many times do you have to do this to win? And unfortunately, it's not grinding through skill either, right? It's like you could just lose 3 battles because you got unlucky 3 times.
Yes.
It's not always... skill does not matter in puzzle games generally, and certainly in match 3 games. Skill is not really a factor. And until you get into those middle, late stages of the game where you actually have some tools available to influence the direction, it is completely random. The skills you get are minimal and frankly not helpful in changing the flow of battle or the outcome of battle. And so it's just, did you randomly win?
I see. I think the difference, I guess, I'm making in my mind is between a game like like a game that we played earlier last year, Murder by Numbers. And obviously, this is a stretch in similarity, but it's another game that combines solving puzzles, solving a general kind of puzzle with some other kind of element. That was like a Picross meets Phoenix Wright game.
Yes.
You get to
a detective story game.
Yes, a detective story game where you have to solve Picross or nonograms. I don't know what the actual technical term is for them. Puzzles.
Yeah, I don't know how to make that one more digestible for people.
Yeah.
It's a puzzle. Just take our word for it.
You got to solve a puzzle to get the evidence that you use to talk to people and get more information. And so in a game like that, you get to a point where, and this is actually a horrible example because you can't fail those puzzles. There's no time limit on them.
You can fail in the sense that you could never figure out how to do it and you give up and never play again, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but that's it. You are now at the point, you're a point in the game where that is the next thing you have to do, and you're just doing that. And if you fail, you're going to a previous save. And I guess that's the distinction I was trying to make with like Puzzle Quest. Losing a battle doesn't mean loading your previous save and try it again. You do still pull a little bit of experience and gold out of it, and you can later in game, obviously, as you said, not at the beginning, go off and do other things and come back to it. So it's not as much a like, oh, you lost, reload your last save. It's try again, which is, in my mind, a little different. I know maybe I'm splitting hairs, but in my mind,
I think so.
A little different
also,
than...
there's no saving, right, in Puzzle Quest.
No,
the game doesn't have a concept of saves. It's auto save, or it's constantly saving your progress.
Yes, yeah, but you're not being booted out back to your state where you were before the battle began.
True, but if you draw a parallel between games that actually allow you to save while you're in battles, if you do really well for the first part of a battle and then save, and then you fail, you can reload mid-battle. That's not something that's true of Puzzle Quest. So not only do you have to restart the entire puzzle, but because the puzzle is fundamentally random, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but because that's how match 3 games typically work. I know there is 2 types, and we'll talk about the other one later, but like you're restarting and from scratch hoping you get better outcomes. And I think what's interesting about Puzzle Quest is that because there is this greater emphasis on progress outside of the puzzle, it becomes more impactful. For me, I would even argue maybe more emotionally charged when things don't go your way, because it has a real impact. I know that if I don't get lucky and get the right thing, get the right match 4s that give me the next move, or I get more skulls in my benefit versus the enemy, that ultimately I'm losing, probably not through moves that I made that were foolish in many cases, or not always, and now I have to start all over from the beginning, and the beginning isn't the same. And so that's an interesting element of it as well, is that it's not a puzzle that plays out the same way. Obviously it can't, but it doesn't even start the same way. So I think one thing that's interesting about it is you could kind of play the system a little bit by just constantly restarting until you've got a favorable roll or a favorable start to the game. It obviously plays out completely different after that, but you can just keep restarting until you get some, the right alignment of skulls, or you get you get a guaranteed match 4, or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I don't think that's I think is, again, not a problem generally with match games. I think the problem is that because it's paired with the role-playing game side, in role-playing games, I want to feel like I'm in control of my progression, right? So like it's either skill-based or it's strategy-based. And while there is strategy in a puzzle game that's match 3, it's not exclusively strategy. There's a lot of randomness to that. And so the way it's tempered is through this idea of skills and equipment, right?
Right.
But they're not, but I would actually argue that like they're actually not that well set up in Puzzle Quest, because they're not that powerful. I don't think they really change the flow of battle that much, right? We take Knight as an example.
Yeah.
The spell you start out with as a Knight is the ability to destroy 1 gem. In most cases, that's a meaningless spell. It is rare that actually does much to help you, because it either assumes that you have a match that you need to make that is separated by 1 thing, whether it's a match 3 or a match 4, or that you desperately need like a skull to explode. For anything else, it's not really worth using.
Right.
it's probably not a good use of your mana.
But that's effectively saying, like, Scratch isn't really a good ability in Pokemon, is it? Like, well, no, it's obviously not. It's what you start with.
But I would, well, you're right, absolutely true. But I would also say that, as you get the first 7 spells, almost all of them are pretty bad. They don't bad in the sense that I'm saying that I don't think they actually affect things enough where it's a compelling part of the battle. And here's my defense of that claim.
Go ahead.
The game is over-reliant on skulls. So in Puzzle Quest, in order to do damage, you either match skulls on the board, or some spells or some skills or spells will inflict damage in a number of ways. And the vast majority of damage that you do is through skull matching, which I am not a fan of. I think it should have been emphasized on the skills and spells side, and that is where you get a better sense of progression, because as you get better skills and spells that you combine to get the right sort of synergies, that is a better sense of progression in influencing the outcome of a battle. Whereas they have overemphasized the skulls. And so almost all the time, and they even explain this in the tutorial, if you have the ability to match skulls, you should probably be matching those skulls. You almost have to think of a more compelling reason why you'd be willing to take that as damage from the enemy, because they almost will always do that approach as well, in order to do something else. So unless there's a match 4, and then you're still ultimately going to want to try and match skulls after you get your next move, you're not really ever getting a good reason to do something other than match skulls. And that, I think, is a failing of the game. Because given how random that is, there's a lot of times where you're just having skulls matched against you and you have no recourse. There's no way to really protect yourself from it or ensure that you're going to be setting yourself up for that.
Yeah, and that is definitely the trade-off with basing it on a match 3, a randomly generated board. And I think, if and when we talk about something like Gems of War, where they push a lot of it more on synergizing,
they push on the skills,
and about synergizing combos, I think that that goes much in the other direction. I think that almost falls apart because you become over-reliant on builds. So you end up with a situation of not really playing around with anything because your whole build is synergized around this loop of, first I need to level this up and get this thing so I can collect all these blue gems, then I use the blue gems with this guy and he does this, and then that kind of loop where it almost feels like some of the more complicated builds in something like Slay the Spire, where
that's sort of the nature of role-playing games, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. But it also, in something like Gems of War, it becomes very frustrating because unless you have... A lot of the cards aren't useful on their own. They're only useful as part of a build.
Yes, that's a fair criticism.
And I think that with the way that Puzzle Quest is set up, there is, at the very least, everything has a utility that it does on its own. Like the ones that I have in the build that I've played since, prepping for this conversation, I've got a ability that does damage equal to half of my green mana. I've got one that turns all of the gems of one selected type into purple stars, which can be used, for setting up some nice match 4s and match 5s. I've got an ability that destroys an entire row of gems and does 5 damage. Another one that just does 10 damage, unaffected by anything else, and another one that does kind of like a poison damage.
Yes, yeah. You do get, I didn't mean to misrepresent it. You do get to the point where there are skills and spells that have a much more pronounced impact than like blowing up one gem or increased damage by X% or whatever.
But you're absolutely right that it is still very much reliant on the board at the time. I think it's a game that focuses on very short-term strategy.
Yes.
There is almost no way to set up a long-term strategy in it when you're playing. You can kind of bring some stuff into a battle based on, what seems like they might work together, but in the end, it's what can I do at this exact moment that is going to give me the best outcome? Because there's not really a lot of planning ahead you can do beyond that.
No. And really no guarantees around it being the best outcome.
No, it's a guess.
Because of the nature, because the nature of any match 3 game is you don't know what's above the board. You don't know what's coming in next. And so the move to match these 3 blue gems versus these 3 blue gems could have wildly different outcomes that massively influence the end, and you just won't know until you do until you make your move, whether it was a useful move or not. And I think I'm not saying that's a failing of the concept or a failing of the game. It does create some interesting challenges when pairing it with something like a role-playing game where there's this idea of meaningful progress outside of that, rather than it being sort of an isolated, you win this and then you're done with this particular puzzle, and maybe there's progress in the game, but it's not adding this idea of experience or equipment or whatever that might be. And I think it kind of sort of leads into another problem I have with the game. Not that I'm, again, by the way, not anti-Puzzle Quest.
No.
But in returning to it, found a lot of things that I was surprised that I didn't love about it. And one of the other things that I don't love about it is I don't feel like it has the right pace. I actually feel like it lacks momentum. And what I mean by that is, I think what I would want ideally from a given puzzle battle in Puzzle Quest is that it starts off slow, of course, and then over the course of that battle, I expect it to as we get so the idea being that there's mana reserves for different colors, and then when you get the right combination of those things, that allows you to use a skill or a spell, that really starts to ramp up the momentum. But it kind of doesn't. And it seems to me like it's for two reasons. One is, unless you get that situation that you described where you've got a really good chain of this thing is going to turn all these things, all greens blue, and that means I get a bunch of match 4s, and now there's because that cleared a lot of the board, there just happens to be a plurality of skulls on the board, and now I've got this skill that's going to destroy all skulls and give me the value of each of those skulls destroyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice little combo if you can get that to properly set up. But I think that doesn't really happen all that often in the game, so that there isn't really much momentum from having a lot of mana versus having no mana, which is how you start. And in addition to that, and I realize this isn't something that happens all the time, but every time it happens to me, I get incredibly frustrated and want to turn off the game, so I have to talk about it.
I'm not going to stop you.
Puzzle Quest implements a concept called Monodrain, which anytime the board has no moves, it resets the board and it resets everyone's mana, which totally kills any aspect of momentum. Because I'm not saying there's none from what I described earlier. There is some. It's just not. It doesn't feel like it's sort of logarithmic increase in momentum to reach that culmination of the battle. A little bit more close to like a smaller linear slope. But that just kills it. It resets everything back to zero. And what I particularly hate about that is by recreating the board, and it's now the other person's turn, they've got this much better board to work with than what we were working with before. So it's also a complete strategic flip. They make it seem like it's an equitable drain on both, but it never is. Whoever created the drain is screwed, and whoever is now able to move has a massive benefit of a fresh board to work with. Because a mana drain, just to reinforce that point, the mana drain happens when there are no moves left, meaning that was a very difficult board to work with. We were slowly getting to the point where there were basically no good matches to make, to the point where we have no matches to make. That tactic of working through that completely breaks when then now we're working with an entirely new board. And the cascading effect of that person's, whether it's you or the AI, their ability to move on that new board is enough to turn the tide of battle. And you can't tactically avoid this mana drain situation.
And that's, I think, if it was something that you could either avoid or invoke. If there was a way to force your opponent into a mana drain situation. Because you're like, okay, they are about to do something to you that they've been building up these mana reserves for, but you've backed them into a mana drain, fucking over their strategy.
Right.
That would be something...
But it just happens. It's something that just sort of happens, right? Like no one... And it's true of any puzzle match 3
it's the consequence of match 3.
Yeah, eventually you get into a gridlock and then it's got to clear it. And I would actually say that the better solution here would be that it doesn't have those consequences. It doesn't need to drain mana. It could even be as little as just reset the board, and it is the other person's turn, and that is definitely a benefit. But to drain the mana doesn't seem like much of a benefit to me, because again, more than it changing who's got the higher ground, if you like, I think it's the momentum that I have the problem with. The killing off of momentum, because Puzzle Quest has long puzzle battles.
Oh yeah, they can last several minutes.
I would even say more. I think they're 10 to 15. I mean, it depends on how fast you evaluate the possible moves on the board and make them, of course.
Right.
But I would say that in general, you're looking at 10, 15 minutes to a battle. Particularly early on when you don't have many skills and spells and all your damage is, I think, what is it? You match 3 skulls and it does...
Yeah, like 5 damage or something like that.
It's 5, right?
Yeah.
So it's doing 5 damage, and initially, you and I think enemies start off with around, let's say, 65 health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a lot of health. So I would actually even say, like, again, to get the pace to be better, one of the things that I would have proposed is less health. You could probably have the health, and I think it's still fun, and it still has the consequence of this randomness and strategic moves, but without it being so long and drawing. Because again, if it's going to be a long, slow death of you, that's not fun either. If you're just constantly watching this AI get lucky with skulls and whittle your health down while you have no sense of recourse. When you get to that point, and this is true of a lot of games, it's not unique to Puzzle Quest, where like the enemy's got 60 health and you've got like 15, you're not really going to come back from that.
No.
Like statistically speaking, you're pretty much screwed at this point.
And there are no comeback mechanics in this game. There's nothing that tries to balance it so that it's, a tight match throughout the entire thing. Like you can just get steamrolled, but you still have to go through all the turns to get steamrolled.
Yeah, and you could always reset and not waste your time, but that at the cost of you're not getting any of the rewards that they give you for loss.
Right.
Which are, of course, always worse than if you'd won, but...
It's at least something.
It's something. To build out that concept of grinding. And I actually think that is the problem that I have with the game, is just that I don't think it's better for having to make you grind.
I know, I think that's generally an issue just with RPGs in general. I've not really enjoyed grinding in 90% of them.
I don't enjoy grinding in games because I feel like that's a way to force out the time of your mechanic rather than just make it better. And so to me it always seems like it is sort of the last bastion of a game designer that can't think of a way to make this work. Is just like, well, then you just keep doing it until eventually incremental increases in stats or whatever, bonuses, randomness, whatever it is, eventually you win. And it goes back to a point that you've made in the past. I think it is a good one, and it's not specific to this, it's just generally about games, is that I think you said something to the effect of, I don't like in games when it would have been impossible for me to win the first time.
Yes.
And I know you never said it in the context of puzzle games, because generally speaking, as we've said multiple times now, there is an element of heavy randomness in puzzle games. So it's a little bit harder to say that you can always get the favorable outcome of randomness at the beginning, the first time you've played it. But I do think it's somewhat relevant here, which is that I need to feel like I have some level of agency in the outcome of my playing of a game. And it's more true with an RPG than it is with a game that's just a puzzle game. So if it's just a match 3 game, like let's say a Candy Crush, I hate the game, but at least I don't feel like I'm over-invested when I try to do something and then gridlock or freeze or whatever, and then I lose and I have to start all over again. Because I didn't really have anything invested in it outside of the puzzle itself.
Yeah, there's no stakes.
But there's no stakes. But when you build this world around the puzzle, this game around the puzzle, and there are mechanics that depend on that, and I need 25 more gold in order to build that sword, and now I'm fighting this battle, and I'm losing through no fault of my own, now I'm getting frustrated because there wasn't something that I could do to make this go better, which to me, and this is not entirely true, but there's an emotional component here that it feels like the outcome of the battle, whether you win or lose, is essentially a coin flip at the beginning. Assuming you always make the best move that's available on the board with the knowledge you have, it's still not a guarantee, which again is fine for those games in general, but when you have stakes, when you have a need for that win to translate outside of the game board, then it becomes a bit more challenging.
Yeah, I think that this is something that you see in, like, I think of a game like Pokemon, the ability for things to either be a critical hit or a miss. And I guess this is just with any RPG system, because that's essentially, that's the case as well. Like, if
that's true,
if there were no criticals and there were no misses, then you could basically know the outcome of every Pokemon battle before it starts. Who's going to go first? What's the best move in any of these situations? And all right, we can tell that this trainer is going to win. But
I know this isn't the game we're talking about, but like, I have a lot of issues with this game that's trying to emulate and improve on Pokemon called Temtem, which I think is still in early access. But the one thing I think it does that addresses that problem is it creates this idea that, so the problem with Pokemon is, what does PP stand for? Performance points?
It's penis points, and you know it.
Penis points. So you get penis points for every move. And realistically, in a given battle, you're probably not going to run out of those. Like, you almost never run out of those. You did, I think, in the very early versions of those games, but in recent memory, I don't think it's ever happened. And I've never had any need to, like, PP up a move and get, like, more of a higher max ceiling on that. But the idea is, if this thing's weak to fire, and I have a fire move, I'm just going to use the fire move over and over and over and over. There's no compelling reason to do anything else. I don't need a tail whip to decrease its defense. It's still slower than if I just hit it with a super effective move. And what Temtem does to try to address it is it imposes this concept of stamina. So a super powerful fire move is going to drain 70% of your animal's stamina. So if you try to use that again the next turn, it is going to translate so basically it uses up the remaining, what did I say, 70%?
Yeah.
So it uses the remaining 30%, and then you basically lose, equivalent of 40% of your health. So it's going to eat into your health bar. You're overexerting yourself. And so that actually gives you a sensible trade-off that you wouldn't just keep using the same move over and over. You might need to rest or swap someone in. And that's a more compelling game about strategy than Pokemon creates.
Yeah.
Totally different, slight aside, but like, these are solvable things.
And I think that's why, kind of circling back to the beginning of this conversation when it was actually about Gems of War, not Rotten Fish. Not Gems of War, I'm sorry. Puzzle Quest Puzzle Quest is not a perfect game by any means, but I think it sets up a very interesting question of how can you effectively marry an RPG and non-standard puzzle mechanics for a battle? And how can you, and not just for the battle, can you also marry those in for crafting, for capturing things, for leveling up mounts, for discovering new, all of these different things that Puzzle Quest does and uses the same variations on the same match 3 8x8 grid to achieve and make a slightly different puzzle to do a slightly different thing. And it just really interests me because it was a very popular game at the time. It was very successful. It was very well reviewed. And it still is in the zeitgeist now because there are variations of Puzzle Quest that are, licensed for Marvel and Magic the Gathering and Adventure Time. But none of them go back to that well of it being an RPG. They all stripped away the RPG elements of it.
Yeah, it is actually a super interesting point that it's not like this is an example of a game that did something interesting and then just it wasn't popular and nobody cared about it and it just kind of, as you fell out of the zeitgeist. It influenced a genre, but in a weird way where like they copied some elements but left a lot on the table. Certainly a lot of what made Puzzle Quest so uniquely interesting at the time. And so it is actually really worth examining in more depth what games have tried to kind of, or have been influenced by it, have reproduced elements of it. What did they keep? What did they leave on the table? And, is there a game that actually does a better job of trying to reproduce what made Puzzle Quest so uniquely interesting while also addressing some of its failings as being an imperfect initial offering of something that we hadn't seen before?
Yeah, because if you go and you look up Puzzle Quest online, you read on Reddit about it, there's tons of people asking for what what else is there out there like Puzzle Quest? And almost all the recommendations come with caveats of, well, this one's good, but it's this. This one's good, but it's a mobile gacha game. This one's good, but it's, it's an MMO and it's more card-based. It's more of this, it's more that. There's nothing that I've been able to find that slots in as like, oh, if you still like Puzzle Quest, here's another Puzzle Quest game. And even, it's successful enough that they did that remaster or remake of it on the Switch, which I think also sold pretty well. Like,
yes, I believe so.
There's clearly a desire for it, but I think almost very similar to Pokemon, but less successful, where up until recently, there weren't really many other things out there that were trying to be Pokemon or Harvest Moon. Up until Stardew Valley, there was just kind of the Harvest Moon series. And was it perfect? No, it was flawed as shit. But no one was attempting to make another one because I have no idea why. And
and fix what was broken. The seed is right. The seed is there for that to be perfected, or at least massively improved. And it doesn't seem like anyone's taken the shot, but I think you and I also have a bit of a blindness here. We've played some, but not all. And so I think really what we want to understand better is, has someone come close?
Yeah. What's the closest anyone's gotten? And is there someone out there who's made that version of a Puzzle Quest game that scratches that same itch and feels like you're playing Puzzle Quest, but better, even though it's not actually a one-for-one, turnkey replacement?
And so next time, I think that's really what we can dig into more, is a deeper understanding of it.
We'll just overanalyze the shit out of it.